So I was sitting in that class and our professor would bring in, people who would come in and talk about different kinds of businesses, and they would just talk about how they built their business. It was like, NPR, How I Built My Business with Guy Raz. It was like he did that every week. And I really enjoyed it. I liked it. And this one time a life coach came in and she was like, I run $1 million business as a life coach. And I was like, what? What is going on?
Welcome to Nurses with Voices. I'm Dr. Lendra, your host and fellow nurse who's traded in burnout for breakthroughs. I'm here to show you how to transform your nursing career into one filled with purpose, reduced stress, and incredible opportunities. Whether you're looking to start your own business, build generational wealth, or simply find a healthier role in nursing, this podcast is for you. Join me to explore practical strategies to overcome burnout, combat bias, and chart new paths in nursing. It's time to reclaim your voice and reimagine your future in healthcare. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Nurses with Voices. I'm your host, Dr. Lendra, and today I have Ann Konkoly here. Ann is a nurse practitioner and certified life and business coach. She runs a private practice helping women navigate perimenopause and also teaches nurse practitioners how to make more money in their practice. She is the host of Nurse Living the Good Life podcast and speaks across the country on life and business topics relevant to being a nurse practitioner. Welcome, Ann. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I was a guest on Ann's podcast and had to invite her over here to Nurses with Voices. So I'm happy to really have you here today. And I want to start off by just asking you, your work supporting nurse practitioners in private practice is really impactful. Can you share what first inspired you to make the leap into entrepreneurship and start helping others do the same, especially when many nurses might feel apprehensive about leaving the traditional role?
Well, you might not like it, but I'm going to tell you. All right. So I got to a point in my career and I felt like I really enjoyed what I did as a midwife. I was a medical director, and I just knew though that there was a certain path in the hospital, and I just, it was like the CNO route, and just didn't quite feel like something I wanted to invest in long term. And so I went and got an MBA, and I was sitting in this class that was called Living the Good Life. And it was a class about entrepreneurship. And had it been called entrepreneurship, I never would have taken it because I just didn't, I really had no understanding of that word, what it even meant. And it wasn't, no, people in my family aren't entrepreneurs. And so, so I was sitting in that class, and our professor would bring in, people who would come in and talk about different kinds of businesses, and they would just talk about how they built their business. It was like, NPR, How I Built My Business with Guy Raz. It was like he did that every week. And I really enjoyed it. I liked it. And this one time a life coach came in and she was like, I run $1 million business as a life coach. And I was like, what? What is going on? And I just furiously took notes that day. I was listening, and she talked about how she kind of had she had a long HR experience and in her kind of professional career. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I could actually build a business that didn't involve the board of nursing. You could be a coach and you could get certified, and then you could just build an online business and you could help people all over the country, and you didn't have to stay in your state, all this stuff, right? You didn't have to have a doctor, a collaborating doctor who I had to pay, a ton of money to just do the work that I'm licensed to do. And so I just decided I'm out. Like, I am out. I'll never forget. I went home. I told my husband, I was like, I'm out. I'm done. Like, I calculated my 120 days notice that I had to give. I was like, I'm going to give it on this day, and then I'm going to be done by, June. This was, 6, 7 months down the road. I'm going to finish my MBA and then, build a business. And so I left the nursing profession, not really intending to go back. And what happened over then the next, essentially 5 years since then is that I don't know, I felt like, I felt a little bit like there was just like a missing piece, like I wanted to do a private practice. I'm going through perimenopause. I've had to figure out a lot of things about my health. And I figured, I could, if I wanted, I could do it my own way and I could kind of figure out, like I could figure something out if I really wanted it. And it wouldn't have to be the way that it was when I was back in clinical practice. I wouldn't be working through the night. I wouldn't be taking call. I wouldn't have to answer to people who didn't get it, who didn't, I wouldn't have to go into a system where I didn't have flexibility. I could do it differently. And so that's what I did. And I built the private practice and now I run both businesses. And so I guess to answer your question, um, I saw that there were opportunities for me as a outside of the nursing profession, and I decided to go for that. And so that taught me that there were a lot of opportunities in general for us nurses, who wanted to stay in the profession who didn't. And then once I got into private practice, I realized again, oh, there is actually a lot that you can still do within the profession in a clinical role where you can create more autonomy for yourself. And entrepreneurship is a really good vehicle to do that. And so it took me, it's a little bit of a roundabout way to get there, but now I work primarily with NPs who they want to diversify their revenue streams. They want to work smarter, not harder. They want to have some flexibility because they've got, pressing concerns on both ends. Maybe they've got aging parents and they've got young kids and, they want to live a good life. And so that's the work I do now. And I love it. I mean, it's fun.
For you. Good for you. I mean, you said so much and that's so resonating. Even the part about, like you said, in the traditional setting, most people aspire to be a CNO, right? And you, like me, you get to the point where you realize like that's really not what I want to do. And for me, being introduced to entrepreneurship was probably one of the best things that could have happened to me because it does make you start to think about life differently, right? Like life is not just about working the bedside, not while life is just not working inside the hospital in the traditional setting. There's so many other things that we can do. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for that as nurses, like that we can really actually, like you said, run a practice and run a whole business because the skills and everything that we learn in nursing, they're so transferable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They
I
really
mean,
are.
and too, like the career alternatives for nurses, there's so many things that you could do where you repurpose and repackage, what you've learned and, your skills of dotting I's and crossing T's and managing patients and being an effective communicator enough to get the job done where you got a patient who needs something and a, care team who may or may not be responsive. It's a lot of work and those are really good skills to have. And there's tons of ways to repurpose them, which is great.
They really are. Just for some listeners who like I know I created like a guide, right? Like 25 nurse consulting businesses that, someone can start. What do you when you talk about how you think nurses can repurpose their skills, what is some advice or what are a few that you would mention?
So I think the one I talk about a lot in my I have a course that's called Side Hustles for NPs, and it's if there's one thing that I think we can very easily do, it's this idea of teaching somebody else how to do something. So for if you have no business experience or you don't, have no interest in running, some sort of a business, I mean, like you can very easily get a mentorship group together. And I see a lot of NPs who think they need to do online courses, plus they need to have a blog, plus they need to have, funnels and all this stuff. And one of the easiest side hustles to really get going is that if you have a skill that you've honed and you're good at it and people come to you and they ask your advice or they ask you questions, you have a complete opportunity in front of you to take that and turn it into some sort of a mentorship. And the easiest way to tell people is like, it's like I see a lot of NPs who are in private practice, right? They kind of develop these specialty or niche practices. And then they, and what happens over time is that people come along and say, well, how did you do that? And it's like saying to somebody, 10 years into business, how did you build your business? And like somebody wants a one or two sentence answer, which will never, it's just like it's hard to recapitulate that all in such a short time. But with a mentorship course, it's interesting because then you can set it up and say, you could record a couple of videos so that they have some maybe content, or maybe you just say to them, we're just going to get on Zoom for 90 minutes over the next 6 weeks, every Wednesday night from 7 to 8:30. This is the cost. Show up on Zoom. I will record them, throw them in a Google Drive, and you charge them. You charge them a fee for coming to the mentorship. I mean, it's a great way to be able to make money. It doesn't include. It doesn't involve a ton of overhead or really a need to understand, a lot about business or again, digital marketing, all that advanced stuff. And I think that's one of the best things. So many of us are really, really skilled at teaching, sometimes because not necessarily because we want to be, but because the profession has demanded that when we show up in the role, we either teach the students, we teach the residents, we teach the patients, we teach sometimes the managers, we teach the attendings, right? Like, this is a skill that you can easily, I think, translate into something that can make you some money. And then do your mentorship a couple of times and then get good at it and record the whole thing and throw it into an online course, build a marketing scheme around it, and you've got a beautiful evergreen, you've got a beautiful funnel that can result in some passive income while you're sipping a margarita on the beach. I mean, like, that's the best part, right? Like, I love when I wake up and I get an email that somebody bought my course overnight. Like, I just think that's like the craziest thing ever, And so teaching is a component of it. I think it's a very easy one for us to go to. And then I think the second one is that there's a segment of people where not everybody's designed to go into a private practice setting, but I think some of us it's been probably the missing piece all along, where we just need the autonomy and the independence to be able to do it the way that we really think that we can do it, right? Like, in a way that really serves the patients and serves the end game. And so, to stay in a traditional setting when you're a person like that, it's just, I mean, it's like soul crushing. And so to realize, to kind of look at it and be like, where do I want to invest my time if I'm going to do something to make some money? If you are the person who's like, God bless America, I can't stand if somebody else tells me I have to do something and it's stupid, right? Like, if it makes no damn sense, then you are a person who should probably consider setting up your own, shop and hanging up your own shingle, because in whatever capacity that is, consulting, private practice, like, get on that road now. Save yourself 10 more years of thinking about it and, being frustrated by how the system is so old and it's outdated and they're never going to catch up. Like, get on your path, just go, do not wait.
And I think a lot of people are kind of like what you mentioned by the mere mention of entrepreneurship, they're thinking like, no, I'm not looking to be a business owner. But I love how you beautifully put how your mentorship can easily become a course. It can easily become a business without getting all involved in with the red tape, right, of it all. And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit to consider we've been teaching our entire career.
All the time.
Right? We've been teaching our entire career. And to your point, it is, I can remember somebody saying like, what is Stripe sending me for this amount of money? Like, what? And then I'll look and go, oh, it's something for my course. And then before you know it, you see like these multiple, purchases from people buying, like what you said, something that you package together. And it's really that simple. I think people get too caught up into like the funnels, into the CRM systems, into all of the other business stuff that they don't know, not realizing that it comes along with it. Like, you could do things, like you said, right on in a Slack channel. You could do things right on Zoom,
100%.
Google Meet. Like, you really can put together something educational because we're smart. We're really smart clinicians. And there's always someone who wants, just like when I started my wellness business, one of the first things, like you mentioned, one of the first things I started getting was DMs, people asking me, how did you start your business? Like, how did you start your IV hydration business? This is something that I wanted to do. And like, who knew, right? Who knew that I would be able to guide other people? But because I have been guiding throughout my career, I knew how to guide them through the steps that I took. So, it's such an appreciation for everything that you're saying. It really is. And,
Yeah.
and many of our listeners are battling burnout, right? And feeling undervalued in their careers. And it's like you said, why stay in that role for so long and feel that way? What strategies do you teach nurse practitioners to build sustainable, fulfilling private practices that can help them overcome these challenges?
Well, we use what we call a coach approach in my kind of area or my community. And it's just got three pieces. And it's the first one is leverage your strengths, right? So you got to know your superpowers so that you can leverage them. The second is, understand why you get stuck and so that you can see from an objective view kind of what's going on in your brain and what's contributing to your overwhelm or your fear, or anxiety, or whatever it is, your stuckness. And then the third piece is to upgrade your operating system and, to do different, right? Learn, know better, do better kind of a thing. And that's a strategy we can use in private practice, right? We can use it for a CEO who's, I just got off a client call earlier. One of my NPs, like she's growing like crazy and she's busy and they're moving offices. They're updating their electronic medical record. They're feeling a lot of the growing pains and they're doing a lot of impressive things, right? She's really building the business. And as you know, when you commit to going in and building a business and scaling it, it is, very often fraught with hairiness. It's, some of it's pretty, but by and large, a lot of it isn't, right? Because that's just the nature of the beast when you get into these things. And if you are in a smaller practice where it's you and maybe one or two other people, and you've got somebody who's really detail oriented and somebody who's skilled at project management and who can really break down a big process into these tiny doable steps and give you Gantt charts and, provide you with essentially a roadmap of how to get from point A to point B. Unless you have that, most of us are we're scrapping it together and we're figuring it out as we go. We're building the plane as we fly it. And so, I think you can use a system like that, a coach approach. You can use it in the setting of being CEO of a business. You can use it kind of from the standpoint of, again, if I'm in a traditional model and if I'm at the bedside and I know that I love to teach and my interactions with patients are very short because maybe I'm in an outpatient setting and it's just boom, boom, boom. And I'm doing vitals and getting people in and reconciling meds and making sure allergies are updated. And there's really no time for me to have build relationships for them. And if you can look at that and say, oh, this is a job that it pays, it does the job, but it doesn't necessarily allow me to leverage my strength. And if you're the person who gets frustrated by that because you're like, well, but I really, I really do want to have a conversation with them and I want, people to feel seen and listened and heard and, and to have a nice experience when they come to this office. But then your boss is like, you're on the clock. Like you return these patients around 2-3 minutes. You got to get in, get out, get going. And so that you can get onto the next room, clean down the room and keep the flow coming, right? Because you got a provider on the back end who's like, let's go, 30 patients or 35 patients a day. And I think at some point, it's like, you just got to look at it and say, number one, am I leveraging my superpowers? Number two, am I aware of kind of how my brain sometimes, it becomes a little tricky and I feel really stuck. And then three, how do I upgrade my operating system so that I either function really well in the role that I'm in, or I opt out and I go find something or build something that's better suited for me. And that's, I think, or I hire on the people. If I'm in the CEO role, how do I hire on the people who can come and backfill where I'm, don't have the strengths and they clearly do. And so that's the strategy. It's, not the only way to do it, but in my community, that's what's worked for me. And I use it as a strategy to help other nurses, because otherwise, if you don't, you just end up burnt out and you can end up, I get a lot of people where, they'll come to me and say, well, I want to get into private practice. And, and I'm sure you've heard this, time and time again, which is, I want to get into, building a business and consulting. Okay, great. I'm really burnt out. Okay. And so we go and build the business or the private practice. And you just fly from frying pan to frying pan, and you are burnt out again, right? You're overworking, you're under delegating, you're frustrated by how slow things are going because you have an expectation they should be going faster, and that's, I think, those are the things where you just got to be onto your brain and kind of how you operate, and you got to have some of that objectivity built in and the awareness built in to be like, wait a minute, I could switch the setting, but I still do the same thing. And, even if the setting is different, like, what's going on here? Common denominator must be me. So we use Coach Approach really to help, people either, as a strategy to help you become a better CEO of your business or just a better CEO of your life, because both are important.
You've dedicated part of your practice to supporting women through menopause, a stage that is often overlooked in healthcare. And what unique insights have you gained from this work? And how can nurse practitioners learn to better advocate for their patients going through similar experiences? I know recently, I think Holly Berry was on, it was Good Morning America, and talking
Yep.
about her experience with perimenopause, and she's now an ambassador for that.
I think, the very easy view is just to say, well, I do something great and the rest of the medical system, they're just crap, and that's actually not true, right? That the current medical system, most of these healthcare systems that are around us, they're not terribly well built. They've got high costs, and they've got, they're they've got their own issues, right? Generally speaking, they tend to try to do good by their patients. I do believe that, right? And then you have a lot of women's health providers, and I say women's health in particular because, if you're OBGYN, urologist, women's health NP, midwife, we just didn't get training on menopause care in school. I mean, most people in my discipline get anywhere from 1 to 4 hours on average over a 2-year program. And I mean, and I remember being probably a newer midwife when I was first in practice, and we used to run a continuity clinic that where we as midwives saw a good amount of the patients, and then we had residents come in and they did continuity clinic in there. And I'll never forget sitting there the one day, and the attending was like trying to teach one of the residents about menopause. And I remember listening because I was really curious how she knew what she knew, because I hadn't really gotten that training. The resident clearly hadn't gotten that training in terms of their education. And I said to her after, like, how did you do that? And she's like, well, I used to run my own private practice before I came here. And she said that was a good, part of my care. But I had to go and learn, a lot. I did courses and I studied. And so I think one of the biggest insights is that if you don't get what you need from the current system, um, I think you can either spend time being frustrated by that as a patient, or you can just look elsewhere and find a place that's got some people who understand and who have the additional training in order to be able to provide the service, right? Like my practice isn't special in that I love it, right? It's work that I really enjoy doing, but it's not, the only difference between me is that I've got an additional couple hundred hours of training and then several thousand patient hours working with women, doing prescriptions, hormone stacking, understanding labs, one at a time hormone replacement, to customizing doses, like it's a whole thing. Do you know what I mean? So if you go to somebody in a traditional system, you're feeling frustrated about that. I think, my old stance on that was like, well, they don't know what they're doing, and of course they want to tell you that, your labs are normal and just get on with it. And now I just look at it and say, of course they do that, because number one, most of them haven't been trained in how to work with women in midlife. Like it's just it's an under-resourced, portion of our training. And so again, then the question becomes, okay, so that really is the case where you have very few people in a traditional model who know what they're doing in terms of hormones and who can give you evidence-based data and give you up-to-date research so that you have good informed consent to make decisions that are best for you regarding your care and your symptoms, then don't stop expecting them to switch, and just, you got to go and find somebody that you can, that you can trust. And I always point people to the Menopause Society. They have a list of, practitioners that are on there. I'm on there. There are many people in our area, but like, you got to find people, right, who are going to be able to provide the service. And I guess that's, it's a long-winded response, but like, I think at some point you just gotta, take call a spade and say they just don't have the understanding and the training and they're scared to do it, which is fine. Send them out, and the patients need to just advocate for themselves and really find the people who are doing this work and who do it day out and day out. This is my bread and butter now, right? Like, I'm good at it because I do it all the time. And that's who you need when you are going through midlife care. Like, you need somebody who is skilled in that. And the typical OBGYN, the typical NP, the typical midwife is just not trained in that way. And it's not, not to their, it's not to their fault. It's just, that's just how it is.
Right. No, you're right. Because I have I see a physician who works with an NP, and whenever the physician is an N, I see the NP. And I actually worked with this NP right before she was an NP. We worked together as, bedside nurses, and I'm very comfortable seeing her. So there was a point where I wanted to get my hormone levels checked. And, so I have, I have a wellness business. But before I got into hormone therapy and everything, and not that I offer that service right now, but one of my nurse practitioners does. And I say all this to say, long story short, when that's when I said, let me check my hormone levels, because at the time, I knew something wasn't going on. Something I knew I was
Yeah,
going through, like the
something.
between the hot and cold flashes and everything. And my GYN, to your point, you would hope that they know more than what they do. However, he wasn't really too helpful. Let's just say that. And again,
Mhm.
he's another one. I can completely trust his judgment.
Yeah.
He has, yeah, listen, I've been going to him for years. However, your specialty is your specialty, your expertise is your expertise. And the same thing when it came down to my MP, when she ordered, blood, she ordered like my luteinizing hormone, and she ordered like something else. And so my MP, who, works within the wellness business firm, she's like, why did she order that? Like, why didn't she order your, the estrogen and progesterone? And I was just like, oh, I was like, you know what? I guess I should have told her. So I guess I should have talked to you first. So I should have told her what to order. But I mean, I say all this to say, if it's not your area of expertise, she's great for internal medicine, but not necessarily hormone. And I think people, the average person, like myself included, the average person doesn't necessarily think about that. They think you're a
100%.
doctor, you can fix it. You're a nurse practitioner, you can fix it. Not realizing, no, they have specialists for these areas, and we really should be seeing a specialist to treat the symptom, or to treat the disease process that we're going through, whatever that element looks like. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And you're a good example, which is that, you just keep kind of going, right? If you don't get, I mean, the people who come to me, they're on average, I think that in perimenopause, it's like on average, women will see 5 different providers before somebody puts the dots together and is like, oh, it's perimenopause. Like, let's get you on some hormone replacement, or let's consider, that this could be an option, and talk through it. And so, I think our job, as a patient, in any of these settings, is when you are, when there's something that's not right, and you have to be an advocate for yourself at the end of the day, and you have to keep pushing, and you have to keep asking, and you have to, keep, unfortunately, going, and finding the resources that work. Other like it's in our nature to be trusting of, right? We're the most trusted profession as nurses, which is good, right? It is really good, but sometimes we can put too much trust in our nurses, right? And our NPs and stuff. And so you have to be equipped as the patient to really do your due diligence, and advocate for yourself. And if that means that you end up going to a couple people until you find somebody who helps you and can walk you through it, um, that's part of our role, and it's not always easy, but that's just what we got to do with this. That's always what we had to do, those women, for the most part, I think. So.
Right, because I thought I was too young. I was like, I can't be going through fall. Like, what do you mean? Like, no, I'm not 40 yet. Like, no. But, listen, but when you start to learn and doing the research, you learn like, oh, this can happen at really early ages, but I don't think people think about that. So,
No, I mean, mid-late 30s, you gotta, I mean, everybody who comes in, they're like, I mean, I think it's perimenopause. And I'm like, I think so too. Right? It's like, because I think most of us are like, but that's not I hear this all the time, but I'm only 42. And I'm like, well, shit, I know. I mean, I'm only 43, but I also recognize that my symptoms started at probably 39 or 40. And so, I mean, I, we know the data says roughly, women in their mid 30s may be starting to go through some perimenopausal symptoms, and so we need to be better about surveying them and treating them and supporting them through that. And it just isn't. Again, it's a under-resourced, underfunded area of expertise, which is menopause care and midlife care. It's just it's always been that we went and got our for pregnancies and then there's this gap after pregnancy. It's like no man's land in terms of care, right? But that's couldn't be further from the truth in terms of what our bodies go through right after we have gone through our childbearing years. And so it's an entire discipline in and of itself. And so I think the key is you just got to find somebody, and there's so many telehealth practices that exist out there. And so you got to find somebody where you're like, I think they can help me, and and do it, and invest in it, and know that it might take you a couple of different people to get there, but you're at least on your way, which is good.
as we wrap up, I want to just ask you about your podcast. On your podcast, Nurses Living the Good Life, you talk about creating a meaningful career that also brings personal fulfillment. For our listeners, what advice would you give to nurse entrepreneurs or those considering entrepreneurship to align their work with their passions and lives for the good life?
I think we use a philosophy. It's called "Do Good and Do Well," and I learned about sustainable development goals from my one of the classes that I did in my MBA program, and I think there's this concept, right? Like I go out into the world and I want to do good work in the world, and I want to do well for myself, and it can be both, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. And so I think the biggest piece of advice is to allow yourself to focus on the doing well piece, right? Like we've always done good work, I think, in our profession. Most of us can attest to, the fact that we've shown up and we've done shifts and we've taken, call from people if they called off, and we've done the work, right? We've sat with the patients, we've done all that. We've done really good stuff. And I get a little annoyed because, I don't know that we've always done well for ourselves in terms of the financial, the transaction that happens in terms of the work provided, the value created, and then, the financial compensation on the other end. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is doing good is always, we've always done that. Your focus is, what does it look like for you to do well? And that's where this concept of, I think, Nurses Living the Good Life comes in. And it's so funny, even when we have a lot of swag, right? So like we got sweatshirts, we got, we've got, water bottles, all sorts of shit, right? Like, and I love it. I love it, but it feels still very indulgent sometimes in my brain to have this thing called Nurses Living the Good Life. Like I even wear the t-shirt, and I live in a huge healthcare community. We have the largest employer here in the city of Cleveland. The largest employer in the state is Cleveland Clinic with, I don't know, they've got something like 50 or 55,000 employees, right? And I wear this logo, right, on my sweatshirt or on my t-shirts or whatever. And I'm like, oh man, people are going to find out, right? Like it's this bad thing to live the good life, right? My old brain is just like, nurses don't live the good life, right? Like that. And so I wear it, I make a point to wear it, and I make a point to talk about it, because I think, and to, continue to do the podcast, and because I want us to think about it. I want it to be first, like I want it to, for us to put it front and center. I want us to prioritize it. And it even just saying that sounds terrible. It sounds selfish almost. There's this piece of me that comes up and it feels still, a little bit selfish. And that's my own work to do, right? But it's part of the reason that I do this work, because I want us to think about, again, we've always done good work. Now I want us to do well. I don't want those things to be mutually exclusive. And so I think for anybody getting into this work, don't worry about the doing good part. We've always done that. We will always continue to do that. It's just part of who we are, I think. But I really recommend that you focus on, like, what does it mean to me to live a good life? What does it mean to me to do well for myself? And like, how does that influence, like, what does that mean to me in terms of, is it wealth creation? Is it, intergenerational wealth, being able to pass something down to my kids? Is it investing in real estate? Is it, being knowledgeable, like having a passive income stream so that I'm sitting on the beach having a margarita and I make some money, or I'm sleeping and I make some money, right? Like that idea of, focusing on something that I think could otherwise feel selfish, or maybe we've been trained to think it's a little selfish or indulgent, and then to really turn around and be like, but what if? Like, what could that mean if I wanted to live the good life? Like, what would my version be of it? I just think it's like such a it's like a good question, right? And if you're the person who's been, you've been doing shift work for a million years, and you kind of got your routine in, and like, you run your practice, and you make good money. Sometimes we don't focus on that bigger picture question, which is like, am I living a good life? Like, if I am not, then what would I need to change? Like, what could I change in order to create a good life for myself if I'm not there yet? Right. And just starting to poke around and ask those questions. I think they're really helpful, when you're trying to build a business and get your brain thinking, kind of out of this mode of, which has always just been like, just focus on the work, focus on the work. Like, no. Let's focus on the, like, how much do you want to travel? So
You're like speaking my language, and I love it. I so appreciate you coming on today. I really, really, really do. So until next time, thank you so much for coming on today. So there you have it, everyone. Until next time, make sure that you stay educated, stay inspired, and stay empowered.